Ever get that feeling? Like you really want to wrap your head around something kind of big, dig in deep, but without getting totally lost in a sea of information.
Yeah, like drinking from a fire hose. Not ideal.
Exactly. And that's what we're all about here, cutting through the noise and getting to the good stuff. And today, we're taking a closer look at Bob Camblin.
Bob Camblin, an artist that honestly a lot of folks might not be familiar with. But trust me, his work is something special. A true original, you could say. And, well, there's a certain mystery surrounding him.
Definitely mysterious. In the art world, it's almost like he's this legend. You hear whispers, see a piece pop up here and there, maybe at an auction, and then poof, gone. It's like chasing shadows.
It really is. It's part of what makes him so fascinating. And for today's deep dive, you've really pulled together a treasure trove of material. We've got some of Camblin's own words, a pretty in-depth biography, even a transcript from this YouTube video that analyzes one of his harbor paintings. Oh, and excerpts from books that examine his life and work, too.
You've been busy.
Had to do him justice. And that's the whole point, right? Bringing all these different perspectives together, seeing what shakes loose. Hopefully we can get a better grasp on Camblin's artistic journey.
I'm all for it. So, where do we even begin with a guy like this?
Well, like with most stories, the beginning's a good place to start. Bob Camblin, born in Oklahoma, 1928. And it seems like, well, art was kind of in his blood from the get-go.
In the genes.
Right. Both parents were artists themselves. So that creative energy, he was swimming in it. Even back in high school, he was the art director for the yearbook. Clearly not just doodling in the margins.
I see a pattern here. So, he grows up in Ponca City, Oklahoma, in the 30s and 40s. That's got to be a pretty unique setting, no?
It was a melting pot of influences, that's for sure. You got the Marland Estate, all this wealth and grandeur, a reminder of the oil boom and its impact.
Yeah.
Then you can't ignore the pioneer woman statue. Like, right there, larger than life. And of course, who could forget the Wizard of Oz sweeping the nation? I mean, who wasn't captivated by that?
Okay, so you've got this mix of ambition, Americana, and Technicolor dreams.
Exactly. And for a young developing mind, for an artist especially, it's all soaking in, right? I mean, you can't help but wonder how these early experiences, these visuals, these stories, they all find their way into his later work, even if it's not always obvious.
As seeds are planted. And then we have his friendship with Forrest Harrisberger. That seems like a real turning point, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. A lifelong bond over 6 decades. And, it wasn't just about art at first. They both enjoyed drawing, but their connection ran deeper. It was more about a shared intellectual curiosity.
Birds of a feather.
For sure. They devoured books together. Emerson, self-reliance, all that. Then there was the I Ching, exploring chance and fate, and, of course, haiku. That love for concise, impactful language, you definitely see it popping up in Camblin's art later on.
Okay, so they're reading, they're thinking, and then they decide to enlist in the Air Force Reserve together. Talk about taking a leap.
And it wasn't just a weekend warrior thing either. They ended up on active duty during the Korean War. And even then, even in that environment, they found ways to keep sketching.
Wow. Talk about dedication.
Right. It tells you something about the importance of their creative practice.
Yeah.
They needed that outlet, that connection to their art, even amidst, all the chaos. And their time in California, sketching the coastline together. Another layer added to their developing visual language, for sure.
You can almost picture them side by side capturing the landscape. And then after his service, he heads to the Kansas City Art Institute, gets himself a Fulbright scholarship, and bam, he's off to Italy.
That's the dream, isn't it? Italy for an artist? Talk about transformative.
No kidding. So what's he absorbing during this time? What's he bringing back with him?
Well, obviously, he's diving headfirst into the Uffizi Gallery, soaking up all those masterpieces. It's like a crash course in the history of Western art right there. But then, and this is where things get interesting, he's also deeply affected by the Catacombe dei Cappuccini in Palermo.
The what now?
It's these catacombs, but not your average ones. They're filled with mummies, like actual preserved bodies on display. A pretty stark and, unusual artistic influence.
Mummies. That's a bit dark, isn't it? How does that even translate into his later work, especially since it wasn't exactly, mummies and tombs all the time?
That's the beauty of it. It's not about literal mummies popping up everywhere, right? It's more about the impact, the feeling, this awareness of mortality, of time passing, of what's hidden beneath the surface. These themes can resonate in abstract forms, compositions, all sorts of ways.
I never thought of it like that. And of course, he's also pulling inspiration from the more classic Italian works, right?
Oh, absolutely. Botticelli, for example. The Birth of Venus inspired Camblin's quirky tribute to KPFT radio in Houston. It was like he saw that listener-supported radio, especially its love for rock and roll, as embodying a similar kind of, well, popular adoration.
Makes sense.
And then there's Primavera, specifically the figure of Flora. Camblin does his own take on Flora, but it's totally different. Masked, full of hidden symbols. Not exactly your typical Renaissance spring goddess.
Definitely taking some creative liberties. So it's clear he wasn't just passively admiring these iconic works. He's like actively engaging with them, remixing them in his own way. And then he comes back from Italy, starts teaching. Seems like a pretty standard path for an artist at that point.
Yeah, that's how it goes for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
A period of stability. You teach, you create, you build your reputation, but then bam, 1976 rolls around.
And things get interesting, right?
You could say that. 1976, Camblin makes this huge decision. He ditches the academic world and becomes, well, a nomadic artist, living off his art, traveling the world. It was a bold move, no doubt about it.
Definitely shaking things up. What do you think drove him to do that? What's the story there?
It seems like he needed to break free, to
Yeah.
fully commit to his art, to experience the world on his own terms, ditch the structure, the routine. And his travels, Italy, France, Ireland, Mexico, even the South Pacific, all those sites, sounds, cultures, they're feeding his creativity, challenging him.
Like an artist on a quest, constantly evolving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And luckily, we have this book that focuses on his personal drawings and writings from 1950 to 1974. These are works he never planned to share publicly, so it's like a window into his mind, his artistic journey.
Raw and unfiltered. That's got to be insightful.
It is. You get a sense of his inner world, his struggles, his evolution. And, some folks have said that Camblin's art, it transcends traditional art criticism. It speaks directly to your soul, evoking emotion without needing all that intellectual analysis.
Interesting. So it's not about decoding symbols or anything like that.
Not necessarily. It's about feeling it, experiencing it.
Yeah.
Like he's bypassing the head, going straight for the heart.
A direct line. Makes you wonder what he would have thought of all those art critics dissecting his work, huh? So let's talk about his style. It sounds like he wasn't one to be put in a box, artistically speaking.
Absolutely. He dabbles in a lot of different styles.
Sure.
Early on, you see hints of abstract expressionism, all about brushstrokes and emotions. Later, it's a mix of social realism and non-objective art.
Mixing it up.
Right. But then, the 80s hit, and things really shift. He teams up with Nancy Giordano, and they develop this style they call mouches volantes.
Mouches volantes. That's a mouthful. What's that all about?
It means flying flies in French. Those little spots or threads you see floating across your vision sometimes, that's the inspiration.
Ah, like floaters.
Yep. And the style itself is all about intricate patterns, dots and dashes. They create these optical illusions that kind of mess with your perception.
So trippy. It kind of reminds me of Escher, or maybe even Dali.
Totally get that. It's all about playing with how we see things, our brains trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah. A visual puzzle. I like it. But even before that, he seems to have transitioned from really detailed drawings to more organic forms, landscapes. What triggered that shift?
It's pretty common, I think. Once you master the technical stuff, the fine details, there's often this urge to explore bigger, more flowing forms.
To loosen up a bit.
Right. And, Eleanor Freed, she's an art critic. She talks about Camblin's fascination with life cycles, with metamorphosis. That definitely aligns with those natural forms, that constant change.
Makes sense. And wasn't there a Texas Overview series where he played around with drawing and watercolor?
You got it. Always experimenting, that one. Never content to stay in one lane for too long. And then there's the St. Bambola series.
St. Bambola, what's the deal with that one? Sounds kind of mysterious.
Oh, it is. Camblin himself said, and this is a direct quote, "St. Bambola died on my way to Houston." Cryptic, right? Like he was signaling a big change, maybe a personal one, maybe an artistic one.
Leaving the past behind. I dig it. So, what else? He did a series of scarecrows in '67. Something to do with Gunter Grass's novel Dog Years, right?
That's the one. And scarecrows, they're so symbolic, right? For Camblin, at that time, they seem to represent renewal, especially in the context of agriculture.
Rebirth, new beginnings.
Exactly. And then you see him playing with similar themes of transformation using stuff like lobster shells and empty larva shells, like literally shedding old forms.
Cool imagery.
It is.
Huh.
And later on, he even starts calling his scarecrows sculptures, like he's elevating them, giving them more weight.
I like how his thinking evolves. It's like we're getting a peek behind the curtain.
For sure. And that brings up another interesting point. Those words you sometimes see in his art, they're not always straightforward explanations. Sometimes they're more like disguises, clues, little riddles. It's like he's messing with us, making us question how we interpret art. It reminds me of Tom Wolfe's The Painted Word and his critique of like how art theory can sometimes overpower the actual experience of the art itself.
Getting too in our heads about it.
Hmm.
And what about those data problems or traps he supposedly put in his drawings? What's that about?
It's like he's built in these little hiccups.
Yeah.
Something's off, a line's out of place, the perspective shifts abruptly. These traps are there to make you think and question what you're seeing.
A game within the art.
Exactly. So he's revealing something about how we see things, how we interpret the world.
I love how he challenges us. Oh, and there's that quote about Goya. Something about remaking him in 20th century terms. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. He was clearly inspired by how Cézanne reinterpreted Poussin,
Yeah.
taking those classical forms and giving them this modern edge. And that's what Camblin wanted to do with Goya, bring that intensity, that social commentary into the 20th century, but in his own unique way.
Paying homage while pushing boundaries. And we can't forget about his collaborations, B&E Productions, the holding firm. What was he up to with those?
Collaboration was huge for him. He really believed in its power.
Yeah.
He formed these groups with Earl Staley and Joe Tate. They did all sorts of crazy stuff. Events, they called them, or exhibitions, tattoo show, Joe Tate's backyard, even a camping show.
Sounds like they had fun.
Oh, they did. It was all about pushing the limits, blurring the lines between art and life, and challenging those traditional ideas of the solo artist. And the fact that they sometimes signed their work as anonymous or anonymous artists, that really emphasizes that collective spirit, right?
It's not about the ego, it's about the art. Respect. So what were some of those recurring themes in his work? I know we talked about stillness, motion, impermanence, and wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi, you got it.
Yeah.
That idea of finding beauty in imperfection, in the transient nature of things. It's all over his Kinsale Harbor scene, for example.
The YouTube video really breaks that down, right?
It does. It points out how even a seemingly still harbor scene is full of subtle movement. Those boats rocking gently, the reflections in the water. It's like a visual representation of wabi-sabi. And then they connect it to all these other cool things like the I Ching and Lao Tzu's teachings about water and even mindfulness.
Wow. So much depth packed into one painting. And those figure four traps that pop up everywhere, what's the significance there?
They're deceptively simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they become these potent symbols for how we get caught, entangled, sometimes by our own doing, sometimes by forces outside our control.
Deep.
It is. And then you've got those tattooed arms representing family secrets and frogs, which for Camblin were like these little Zen masters, embodying wisdom and stillness.
I love those visual metaphors. And speaking of visual tricks, wasn't there a whole magic and illusion thing going on? That fits with the whole trickster persona, right?
Oh, definitely. Sometimes it's literal magic. Other times it's more about playing with perception, reminding us that nothing is quite as it seems. It's like he's constantly pulling back the curtain and showing us the illusion.
Keeping us on our toes. And the traps. That seems like a pretty major theme.
Huge theme. Fear traps, time traps, those we create ourselves and those the world throws our way. He uses all sorts of visual cues to get this across. Cages, knots, even the way he structures a composition. It can get pretty unsettling, like you're trapped in his mind, in his world.
Wow. That's intense.
It is. But amidst all that, there's also this sense of enduring stillness in some of his work, like a calm within the chaos.
Interesting contrast.
Right, and he achieves this through balanced compositions, a sense of harmony, solitary figures, peaceful landscapes, like little moments of quiet reflection, and those puppets, scarecrows, skulls, and those glass reliquaries filled with murky water that he did in the 70s, and all the connections to Freud and De Chirico and all those heavy hitters.
Yeah, that's just pretty heavy.
It is. He's exploring the darker corners of our minds, our fears, our mortality. It's mysterious, a little bit creepy even.
Not for the faint of heart. And the fact that he often viewed his paintings as puzzles, that just adds another layer to it all.
Totally.
Mhm.
He wanted us to engage, to decipher those visual clues, to come up with our own interpretations. It's art that demands your attention, your participation.
A true collaboration between artist and viewer. I like that. So finally, let's talk legacy. Camblin's been called a mystical trickster figure. That's a pretty fitting description. And his impact on other artists, especially in Houston, clearly he made a mark.
A huge mark. I mean, Earl Staley, he credits Camblin with teaching him some of the most fundamental lessons about drawing and composition. Then you've got Penny Serling, who talks about his insatiable curiosity, his love for collaboration. Carolyn Farb even sees his entire body of work as this massive autobiographical narrative, even the abstract stuff.
That's fascinating.
It is, and the fact that he became more reclusive in his later years, that his supporters struggled to put together a retrospective, it just adds to the mystery. And then there are those whispers of treasures hidden in his estate. Like, there might be more to the story yet to be discovered.
So, after this deep dive, where are we? We've traveled through Bob Camblin's life, explored his influences, his artistic shifts, his collaborations, those recurring themes, and, well, his enduring mystique. It's been a journey, that's for sure.
And what have we learned? I think the biggest takeaway is that Camblin wasn't about easy answers. His art is an invitation to think, to feel, to question. And isn't that what it's all about? Embracing those unanswered questions, just like you do with these deep dives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So here's a little something to ponder as we wrap things up. Maybe the most valuable insights aren't those neat, tidy answers. Maybe it's the questions themselves that matter. The ones that stick with us, make us dig deeper, challenge how we see the world. And if you ever get the chance to see some of Bob Camblin's work in person, take it. Dive into those visual puzzles he created and see what you find.
Who knows what you might uncover?
Exactly. And that, my friends, is the beauty of it all.